Those of you who were on time, which is usually more than myself, welcome to our webinar today, which is all about preparing for Search Generative Experience and Google's upcoming major search AI update. Now, just a little bit of context as to what's going to happen. So I'm going to give a couple of minutes for people to kind of filter through naturally. I feel like this is like COVID times all over again, where it's like, can you guys hear me? But we'll let people kind of filter through for a couple of minutes. But for today's schedule, you're going to be blessed by myself as a co-host to Dan's talk today, which I've just kind of covered around SGE. But before we get cracking, whilst we're waiting for people, my glamorous assistant in the background, Reza, should have put a poll up, quick little engaging question, because it's something, I tell you what, I would never have known. But for those of us that are early, here's a little question. So if you go onto the right-hand side, it's on the meeting chat. It is a quick little Christmas question to get everybody kind of a bit into the mood. And it is, what year did Mariah Carey release All I Want for Christmas? Now, I'm not going to lie, I did not know this. And to be honest with you, I'm just jealous of the amount she makes every year from this song. Her and Michael Bublé should just do a world tour together. Take over, job done. And whilst we wait as well, I'm just going to go over a couple of kind of ground rules. Just for context, this will be recorded, and we'll share the recording with everybody after the event. It will be uploaded onto our YouTube, so please make sure that you're following us on all social channels, Twitter, X, whatever on earth it's called nowadays, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram, all SALT.agency. So make sure you're following us there so you can get this content afterwards. If anybody does have any questions throughout, so Dan will do the talk. It'll be about 30 or so minutes. Please put them in the Q&A section of this. And what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll moderate a couple of the questions and pick out some that we would like to answer. Ideally, would love to get through everybody's questions. But if we don't have that opportunity, then you can kind of engage with us after. So if you go to SALT.agency/call Dan, I know he's got his own URL now. Who does he think he is? Hey, but there you'll be able to ask more kind of engaging questions, probe anything that maybe you want to ask, but it's a little bit more private, or just generally have a chat about everything that he's kind of spoke about today. So yes, any questions into the Q&A, and I'll moderate those. And then anything else, it is SALT.agency/call Dan. So please pop that in there. We'll give it a couple more minutes before we go. So if I just whittle back to my question. So what year did Mariah Carey release All I Want for Christmas? So we have got, I bet everyone's Googling it. You're all liars. Look at this. Everyone's getting the question right. So we had 1989. Nobody did that. 2001. 2000. I think I remember 2001. So 12% there. 1994 got 56%, and 1996 we have 31%. So I hate to break it to those who put in 2001 and 1996, but the correct answer is indeed 1994. So pat on the back, little festive mince pie for everybody there. Round of applause. Right. Sweet. So the time is 17:04. So just to reiterate, we will be uploading this onto YouTube, so make sure you're following us on all social channels. Any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to kind of go through all of those at the end. Anything that we don't go through, please do engage with us at SALT.agency/call Dan. Whether it's something that you want to kind of talk about now, or even just annoy Dan and get all the information from him, please do engage with that. But without further ado, I will leave the stage to the incredible man himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Taylor. Silent round of applause.
Thank you, Thierry. I think for the next webinar, I'm going to get someone else to pre-host, because it's kind of a bit of a hard act to follow. It also upsets me that you can't remember if you remember 2001 or not, because I definitely remember 2001 and 2000 and 1999, unfortunately. But yeah, hello and welcome everyone. As Thierry's kind of already given me an introduction, I'm Dan Taylor. I'm head of technical SEO here at SALT, and today I'm going to be talking predominantly around our findings of Search Generative Experience, and that's just come from hours of data analysis, playing around in Google and Search Labs, patent reading and testing to see what we can potentially break or influence. So over the next 35 or so minutes, it comes in slightly under. We're going to try to cover a lot of information. As Thierry said, this is going to go up on YouTube, and feel free to reach out afterwards if you have any questions. But ultimately, there's 3 key things I want you to actually take away from this session. Firstly, a top-level understanding of what Google SGE is, how it works and how it sits within Google's product portfolio, because for me, that's important in understanding what the future potentially looks like in that regard. Also understanding how SGE will likely impact your business and organic performance. And lastly, some learnings we've had of things we can see correlating with working with SGE in its current format in beta. All of this is based on our research, our testing, and even things like Google Search Central Live, which I was fortunate enough to go to in Zurich a couple of months ago, and also just Q&A insights for people like Gary Liesch, ISS Barcelona. So as Thierry said, any questions, please throw them into the Q&A section. Alternatively, if you want to just have a chat afterwards, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, or please, and as Thierry said, if you just want to annoy me, you can follow that URL and just slot something into my calendar and we can just chat about the questions. If you don't want to ask them in a public format, because being honest, I'd be that person, I'd have a question and I won't want to ask it in public because I don't like that. So first, I just want to cover off what SGE actually is. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the basics of this, but essentially SGE is probably going to be one of the biggest disruptors that we've seen for the past decade. Probably more disruptive to SEO than what the first Penguin rollout did to everyone's rankings, if anyone's unfortunate enough to remember what that was like. So SGE is Google's essentially a new AI-powered search feature, and it's currently being tested in the US and 120 different countries. None of them are really high Europe countries or elements like that, but good test bases, India and a lot of the Caribbean and Asia. It's currently not open to the public. To access it, you need to go through Google Labs, and to do that, you do that through a US IP, through a VPN, and then do the registration through Google Labs in that way. But having the access to beta actually allows us to see how it's evolved over the last few months, to experiment with it, test with it, and actually see how it's processing real-time information and data and its change frequencies. The results that are generated, Google refers to as snapshots, so that's what I'm going to be meaning when I say that. And in Google's own words, they act as a jumping off point for users to further explore parts of the web. And this is important because they also want people to find more perspectives and more content and hidden content. Slightly related to what Google said, I believe, around hidden gems, but ultimately surfacing unique value. So I'm not going to go into this too much in depth, but essentially the technical side of this is that SGE is powered by a family of AI models. Most recently, it was running off Mum and Palm 2, but that has now been replaced. We know Palm 2 has by something called Gemini, which is a multimodal large language model. Gemini is a great improvement. It can process text, audio, images, and it's already been rolled out within Google Bard and is set to be rolled out within Google SGE when that makes its full public release. The way that SGE works, it works as a retrieval augmented generation system. So it doesn't just use AI and a data set to create the results. What it does is a user will go to Google, perform a search, either through the search product or through Assistant as the interface. It will then start to use multi-language model, but use the information available on the web and Google's knowledge base to kind of fine-tune and refine those results that are coming back. Just for some context as to what I mean when I'm talking about the upgrades to these large language models, Gemini outperformed ChatGPT 3.5, which is the free version, in 30 of 32 academic benchmarks, which AI is being measured against. Now, there are rumours that ChatGPT are going to be releasing 4.5 soon, so it is a constant race to be first in that sense, but Google's processing power and data behind it will make it much more powerful. Another key element here is that Google have also said that Gemini has been rolled out to Assistant, which is obviously what's powering voice search and other elements on smartphones and smart devices. Now, Assistant doesn't really get spoken about that much nowadays because voice search hype sort of waned after 2020 didn't hit that high Comscore score market. But previously those models weren't working as well, so now Gemini is going to supercharge, and we are seeing more people start to use voice search, and that adoption curve will be steep. So it's important to understand that Assistant is on the roadmap, as well as conversational search and through voice bots as well on the cards. Now, I also want to take a second to also highlight how Google positions SGE within their portfolio. So it was released in May this year, and in the Q2 earnings call, Sundar Pichai, the head of Alphabet, actually came out and mentioned it was a clear quality win. It's been mentioned a number of times across both earnings calls, and given the developments in what we're seeing in Gemini technology, and regardless of our thoughts as SEOs as to whether or not we feel SGE actually makes the results better for users than the current Google search product, it's coming, whether we like it or not, and we need to be prepared for it so it doesn't actually blindside our SEO programs, because Google are likely not going to start pulling back at this point, given the shareholder interest and the amount they're investing into the AI technologies and how they see in their roadmap. So in this session, we've already mentioned other AI products, Bard, ChatGPT-4, and why we're honing in on SGE with such a lens and a narrow scope. Now, whilst the SGE landscape is ever-growing, and more tools are entering the public realm. Now, SGE, for me, and a lot of people, poses the greatest potential threat to what our status quo is. And to demonstrate this, I actually want to borrow a risk demonstration model from the world of astrophysics, because I very much feel like an asteroid hitting the Earth, this is going to be a Google product that hits our organic campaigns. And the way that astrophysicists measure and estimate asteroid impact is something called a Torino scale. So simple to understand, you simply have a diagram which measures the potential size of a update impact versus the potentiality of the actual size of impact. Now, thinking of SGE like and the Neo object, Neo, isn't too far-fetched. So likewise, Bard and Bing's Prometheus have a potential to be disruptive to the user journey and how they interact with Google and Bing products respectively. But based on what we've seen in SGE testing, Prometheus and Bard are in that middle ground. Their adoption's kind of slow at the moment. We're not seeing too great an impact out the traps. Bard has the potential now over the next few weeks and months to become more impactful, but Gemini is powering it. But SGE, for me, is in that top right corner. It's in the critical 10 box. It poses the greatest threat. Now, we know from testing, generally using SGE for a few months now, but it doesn't actually generate for every query. So there is a blind spot there, and it also doesn't generate consistently and in the same way for every vertical. But there are some core and fairly consistent areas that if you use these kind of queries, you'll find generative results. These are the question-based queries. So the how do I, why does, what is, how are. These kind of searches generally pull a result fairly consistently. You then have product searches. So these are your product service, your branded local. So things like winter sleeping bags or alternatives to e-counter software, best two-factor authentication, things like that. Now, I've put medical and financial in italics because from testing, SGE is a lot less frequent and likely more sensitive at the moment, and specifying at the moment, around actually pulling an AI snapshot for financial and medical queries. Even for things like over-the-counter medicine, SGE doesn't even generate a result automatically, meaning that it gives you the option to generate one with a button, or it just doesn't give you the option at all. For information and medical, for example, like features of a kid's bank account or what is acid reflux, it will still generate the result. So financial informational and medical information is still fairly consistent, but the more nitty-gritty and expertise you get into that, for want of a better phrase, it becomes less consistent. Now, the other way to look at how we can estimate impact is if we look at previous Google search changes. So again, not wanting to make myself and other people feel old here, but it's 10 years ago next year that Google introduced feature snippets. And since then, they have evolved. We've seen various iterations, but we know that feature snippets, when they feature, also when they appear, they can absorb about 35% of the total clicks that would otherwise go to the classic template link results. Now, along with users not clicking on anything or contributing to anything, that is about 57% of searches currently being a no-click search or a zero traffic search. Now, looking at what we're seeing across potential queries and how we can estimate them on potential the impact of potential clients, a lot of studies already are starting to say that there's a 30 to 35% impact of potential of SGE, and that's mirroring the 35% from feature snippet impact. But whilst we don't actually have data to do the scale of the CTR measurement, because just of currently how SGE is accessed, it being in beta, there being nothing in the Search Console, no third-party way to do this. From what we're seeing and the testing, the impact could be potentially for websites anywhere between 10% and 60%. So 35% as a middle ground does fit nicely into this. Now, there are a huge number of factors at play here. Such as how many pages drive and what amount of traffic they drive to a website, how well AI, and also how well AI is actually able to disrupt the user journey of your target audience. So to kind of visually show this a little bit more, I've just modeled this graph. So in this, you'll see CTR estimations. The red line, I'm using AWR's current CTR estimations for general search. In the black line, I'm showing what the CTR would look like with a 35% reduction, which means if you had a query with a monthly search volume of 1,000, in theory, right now, being in the top position would drive 380 to 400 sessions a month. But in a 35% world, that would drive around 250. So that's a considerable drop. And then the blue line is the worst case scenario from what we're seeing in some testing, and that's if you lose 60%. Now, obviously, different queries will have different disruption points, and disruption is the key heavy lifting phrase here. Whilst SGE surfaces responses to a search query, AI can't actually satisfy all user journeys. There's the user behavior of actually navigating to a site and how they can be satisfied, what their actual intent is, but there's also an adoption window to take into account. Voice search has taken 7 years after launch to reach a market penetration rate of 27% in the US. Now, this is slightly more prominent. More people have access to smartphones, more people are using Chrome as default. There are other factors here, but there will be an adoption curve. Now, whilst AI generative, I'll put my teeth back in. Whilst generative AI is actually powerful, we can't actually look at the impacts of AI things on jobs image production the same as AI production. So, for example, with Midjourney, with ChatGPT, I can just ask it very simply to make 8 images of a fish reading a newspaper. Now, for me, the generative AI in this specific instance, as weird as it is, has actually satisfied my journey. I've gone to the internet, I wanted this image, I've had it created, and I've had it made in a number of different art styles. But when I go to Google, I'm going with different purposes, and users are going with different purposes a lot of time. Sometimes you just want the information, sometimes you want to buy something, sometimes you're watching a TV show and you see an actor and actress, and you just, for the life of you, can't work out where you've seen them before. And then you start stacking queries and go on a user journey. This is why, when we also look at the assessment of SGE and the impact and the types of keywords that are being targeted, we can't just look at them as informational, commercial, navigational. We have to take that keyword mapping angle and throw it out the window. We actually have to look at how able the AI is to actually disrupt the user journey. So this is why we look at 4 key user groups. We look at a participator, a purchaser, a learner, and the shopper. Now, a participator is going online to actually participate and engage with something. They want to watch a video, they want to engage in a meaningful discussion on Reddit, if one such exists. They want to consume a media of some sort. Now, AI isn't able to replicate the experience of engagement in this way. It can be a recommender, like a middle person, and steer the experience, but it can't actually satisfy the endpoint. Now, by contrast, a learner has gone to Google to discover something. They're going to learn. They're seeking a piece of information, and they don't really care about the source. They just want it to be reliable and to get the information quick. So this is where feature snippets were most impactful, and SGE can be equally, if not more impactful, as because feature snippets end there. Now, SGE allows powerful summarization and collation of information, but it can also take users out of that current search journey and move them on to a completely different path. And by this, I mean disruption of a notion called query stacking. So if we look at how users engage on the internet again, a user will go to a web to Google, they'll perform an early stage query. They'll then perform multiple refinements. They might have TikTok videos indexed as well and do a multimodal search journey and go across there. And then finally, they'll get to that end query. Now, the standard user journey in this with SGE, AI has a huge number of opportunities to either influence or take over the full process. And that ends the user's need to actually interact with the website. So if your search traffic isn't actually capturing around early stage or early refinement, and you're relying on users to go into, say, refinement 2, refinement 3, or further down that funnel, you might see that people aren't actually progressing that far because their journey is being derailed or AI is influencing it with other information. So actually tracking the entire user journey and the keyword sets they're using and that path to endpoint and the query satisfaction is important. So with that in mind, let's have a look at some top level examples of actually how SGE behaves for different query types. So we know with SGE, Google's trying to allow users to have a jump off point. They're trying to collate, they're summarizing, they're providing information. It keeps people within the Google ecosystem. It disrupts our status quo, what we're used to, but there are ways in which we can compete. Now, 4 key areas in which we can typically compete are the link carousel, generative statement inclusion, product and brand recommendations, both through Google Shopping and general inclusion if you're SaaS or a non-tangible product, and also inclusion within the conversational prompts. Now, way back at the start of the session, I showed how Google's using the World Wide Web in that little weird diagram, and also how it's using the knowledge graph to power results. These are all variables within our scope of control already. We can control, and well, to an extent, we can influence the knowledge graph. We can influence web results. Our learnings and strategy need to come from reviewing our exposure and pivoting and understanding that as to how we can then influence the SGE snapshots to pull through text, images, products, etc. Now, if we look at the link carousel, by default, this is one of the core areas. Now, by default, it shows up the free results. These are free sources, and based on the correlations of what we can see, those first 3 sources usually have the highest amount of frequency in the sense that, as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a number of little blue arrows. They will have more actual citations coming from them than others, or they will have the largest amount of real estate within the snapshot. Now, by default, I say there's free. If you were to hover over that, and you can just about see an image creeping into the right, that isn't a bad screenshot, a little blue arrow will appear and you can start scrolling across the other sources. I've seen results with up to about 10, 11 different sources, and I've shown this to people outside the SEO world, and they don't even think to hover over it. They just see the sources, ignore them, and then carry on. So being in the first 3 of these is extremely important. Now, that as well, moving on to the actual generative statement itself, to be one of the prominent drop-down sources. Now, this is the snapshot, the generative statement, the actual text, the collation, the information that Google's pulling through. Thankfully, being a cited source for this information is, in my opinion, important for 2 reasons. Firstly, you are front and center. You're effectively at the top of the search results. If this is above feature snippets, it does become below paid, but it is still above the feature snippet organically. And you've got a unique visibility slot because the amount of effort to get into this is quite difficult and there has to be trust built up. And secondly, if a query is about your brand or brand alternatives, you have an opportunity to actually start steering the narrative and taking control. The third element is the product recommendations. Now, this kind of follows on. Now, a lot of these come through from Google Shopping as a core and consistent source for the actual information. But as you can also see, it starts to pull through reviews, it starts to pull through zero-party content, unique product descriptions, and actually summarizes them. So this is important in making sure your PDPs and product pages are very well formatted. You've got the unique content, you've got the structured data, you're including user reviews, and you're making it clear for Google to put all these dots together to make the AI lifting a lot better. if we carry on looking at product searches and look at a non-tangible product, say you're in the market for an ID verification software and you're looking at a kata and you want to look at alternatives. This is great. You look at this and you see, a kata themselves are actually being positioned within the generative result and they're being cited. But what you actually look at is the fact that they're targeting the query best identity verification software providers here, and they're positioning themselves first within the blog, as is a very standard SaaS thing to do. Here's 11 companies that do X. By the way, we're number 1 and we've got the most real estate. But you've got to actually question here whether or not being cited here is actually helpful, because it's definitely not helpful to be given a trusted source for Google to pull information on one of your competitors. So looking at this, they're telling people from their own blog that this is an alternative to us. So there's two sides to this coin, and that again can influence our content and our overall strategies. I also want to just touch on brand and how people search for reviews. So if you're a product but you're actually physical locations, airport lounges are a great experience for this. So escape lounges are quite common globally. So if you do a search for "are escape lounges worth it?", you get Google prominently telling people that they're chaotic, have long wait times, and are disappointing when it comes to food and drink, which is a key perk of an airport lounge. So with this, you need to then understand how you can influence this, how you can change the narrative. So this isn't just about optimizing your own website. This is where digital PR comes into play. This is where review management comes into play, and how you can actually start to influence the wider spectrum and scope of things. Now, the fourth core area, which I'm going to touch on, is essentially these conversational prompts. Now, this is kind of like an also ask box on another level. So these appear at the end of SGEs, generative results, and they can also appear within search results themselves in between results. And it's essentially with questions, and in fact, going back to that query stacking notion, these are probably, according to Google, the kind of questions people then ask after looking at the first result. So this is directly hijacking the early stage query or first refinements and wanting people to start engaging with this tool and with Bard and with SGE. You can work hard to get into here, and there are examples we've seen where people can start with an informational query and the conversational prompts will start to bring brands in there and actually start doing brand recommendations as well. So again, that's a fourth opportunity to actually win. Now, another opportunity, which I'm not going to class as a core opportunity, mainly due to how scalable or unscalable, I guess it can be, is information accuracy. Over time, I imagine this will greatly improve, especially as we try to target more as a tactic, because we're SEOs and that's what we do. We try to influence everything for traffic. But for now, in order to identify, it requires really good subject knowledge to actually identify, and it can't really be done at that scale. So a good example of this, this was for a query, best books for women, published in 2023. And I will admit I had to rely on my fiance to help me here because he's a big bookworm, but I do get the SGE result. But the information technically isn't accurate. I'm asking for the best books for women published in 2023. Now, only 2 of those books, Fire Rush and Someone Else's Shoes, are actually published in 2023. The others were all 2022. Google is trying to use the source of the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist and another one, the must-read books, as a source for this query. Now, Google has a knowledge of what all these books are. If you search for them all individually, there's knowledge panels, you can find the ISBNs, their products, Google understands them. But this search is screaming out for someone to actually make a highly targeted piece of content and join all the dots to answer this directly. Now, this is, again, not as scalable because you need to monitor and actually see how accurate it is, but this is a good opportunity for brands to actually give Google the exact content it wants. And I'm going to come on to content targeting later. So it actually takes us nicely onto what we see working and how we believe we can influence this and actually get this working quite well, get it working not only for your clients, but how you can actually communicate and pivot strategy as well. So like with anything in SEO, there are a lot of things in we don't 100% know, like search generative experience is change frequency, which is very much dependent on Google's ability to crawl and index websites, cache and process information. And with all sectors like travel, Christmas buying, things like that, there's a lot of seasonal uplifts, and Google allocates resource seemingly to queries and updating SGE the same way it does to different sized websites and to search queries themselves. So that's at least one consistent thing that's transferring over. So if we carry on looking at what is working well, there is a very strong correlation between actually ranking well in the classic blue links and actually having an AI snapshot. Now, it's not guaranteed, but being in the top 10, at least, of the 10 blue links, holding the feature snippet for a query, actually being in a traffic driving position to begin with, tends to correlate with performance in SGE as a source. It's therefore not that much of a stretch to kind of say that adding a roadmap for SGE, your current strategy, isn't actually a completely separate strategy altogether. It's just amending an additional thing to be worried about and concerned about, or if you want to look at it as an opportunity, to your actual SEO roadmap for 2024 and what it should be covering. Now, in terms of rollout, there are no official rollout dates yet for SGE. Personally, I think it will come either in February, March of 2024 with Q1, because the increase in testing from just the US and India and Japan to 120 other countries seems like a big data stretch and more confidence in the tool, plus with shareholders wanting to actually make dividends from actually the AI tool bringing in money. So we have potentially got that to come, but it's not too far detached from what I believe our actual strategies normally are. The other thing to actually start looking at and thinking about is actually the basics of being indexed. And that comes down to meeting quality threshold for the query itself, being served in a good position consistently, and have the content provide the user value and a beneficial purpose, but not only matches the query, but the end user journey as well. So technical SEO will become more important at this stage. We need to better understand how Google's crawling the site, better understand how it's indexing things, because again, crawl frequency, change frequency will, and what we see, I say will, it does seem to impact the SGE change frequency as well, and how quickly Google process this. Now, beneficial purpose alone isn't a strong enough factor. You also need to meet the quality threshold for the source type of your website for the query you're actually in question. So, for example, if you search for the best laptops for gaming, you'll get a variety of websites from commercial blogs on actual commercial stores and e-commerce sites, through to publishers and tech sites. Now, the threshold of that e-commerce website's blog is a different threshold from a publisher. So it's worth bearing this in mind, because for some queries, say, for example, if you are an e-commerce store and you have a very strong publisher holding a lot of the prominence in the features, in the SGE results, it might not be possible to dislodge that because the beneficial purpose and all the other dots are too connected. That might take time and user data to change over, so it's not a straight swap in, swap out. Very similar to how it is with Google search anyway. The other thing I want to mention, and going back to the book example and the information accurate example, is SGE snapshots love highly targeted content. I believe this ties in a little bit with the Hidden Gem initiative and also what they want to do with perspectives. But I also believe, to the point, is why we've seen Reddit improve in organic performance in recent months. Now, whilst Reddit does have its flaws, I'm not going to say that Reddit is the shining beacon of all websites, but the content users publish is very niche and highly targeted, and sometimes it can be helpful. Well, one thing that you can't accuse most Reddit threads of being is brands trying to talk to consumers. It's usually peer-to-peer, for better or for worse. Now, more helpful and direct in answering a query than large blog posts trying to cover whole topics in one fell swoop, I think is a viable strategy to move forward with. And the format this can be in various different places across the site, and it can be different content snippets, as long as it fits in with the page beneficial purpose and the correct targeting. But this also throws a lot of keyword mapping and how to blog articles on its head a little bit, because you want more precise queries, more so than the user intent, and you want the answer to be more precise for Google. So this will be a pivot in content strategy in this way. Google wants to be able to go that this is the best option for X scenario, and this is the best option for Y. And we can infer backing on this, as Google also allows users to utilize SGE whilst browsing, which has been rolled out. So users will be able to go to a website. So they've actually managed to go through the search, through the AI, they're on your site. They'll be able to activate SGE to create a summary of your page there and then. So it'll use your headers, it'll use your page structure, it'll use your content, and pull out not only the key talking points for them to skim, but it'll also pull out the questions that's trying to answer as well. So this means that your content needs page structure, it needs the title structures, it needs logical structure, it needs to stay on point and on purpose, because that's another tool that users are going to have access to. And at this moment in time, we don't know how frequent they're going to use it, and we don't know if we're going to be able to track it either. The other thing I want to mention on brand is how Google handles this within the SGE snapshot. Now, this comes down to building an entity, having the correct organization elements, but Google's actual ability to discern your brand or company name from others who have a similar name is going to be vitally important. In simple terms, Google stores a database of entities within its knowledge base, and it's how you get a knowledge panel in classic modern times. It's how Google also begins to associate your brand as an entity with other topics and associated elements. So you'll notice in the examples I'm actually providing here that I've searched for a company in the finance element, and initially, a few weeks ago, it was pulling through the correct company. It was recognizing this completely fine. The conversational prompts were recognizing it fine. But then it was, here are some reviews for other companies with Bright in the name. So it's then starting to pull through literally New York, recruitment firms, other financial things, not right. Now, if you perform that same query now, it still understands what you're looking for in terms of a payment company, but it's now pulling through a prominent review for another company of the same name and directly calling it a scam. Now, this could be devastating if this is a first-time user interaction with your brand. So being aware of this, monitoring this, and taking control of that brand surf is going to be even more important. And this isn't just for your website, this is for your social and how you control your brand narrative on review websites and over time as well. Now, the final point I want to cover off, and I appreciate you also for sticking with me, is very, very relevant for e-commerce. Now, Google Lens has been around for a while, and it's increasing in adoption. But what Google is wanting to do with SGE for this is a very different beast entirely. This is currently in the process of being rolled out for testing. Google will allow users to use AI to generate images of fake products that will match their actual product query, and then use this fake image as a pivot into Lens to create that search experience and shop visually similar products. Now, this further emphasizes the need for good product imagery, multiple product images, making sure they're clear, having a good product gallery linked, accurate product descriptions, key features on the page, your metadata, everything. This has a really big potential as a big opportunity for challenger e-commerce sites with unique or very distinctive clothing, but can also really disrupt the commerce journey, because people aren't going to be searching for white trainers and then using that query stack method and going further and refining. They're going to describe an image and then use the image. We don't know how we can track that yet. We don't know if that's going to show as impressions. We don't know if we're going to even have visibility in Search Console. So again, that's another potential black hole for traffic to go down. In addition, Google is also playing heavily with e-commerce, for anyone who's seen this in the US, with things like within SERP filters, add banners in between different search results. But that's probably a whole nother session on its own to go through, because that is a scary SERP. But on that note, I'd like to say thank you for sticking with me. I'm going to hand back over to Thierry so you get a break from my voice in a moment. But if anyone has any questions, please throw them into the Q&A. And if you want to have a chat with me, just follow that link and put something in my calendar. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much, Dan. I'll give him a couple of seconds to have a bit of sip of water, because talking for that long to be fair. But yeah, thank you so much for taking us through that, Dan. That was honestly really, really, really insightful. I will now be immediately trying to purchase my AI generated multicolored jacket in time for Christmas, which is exciting. So if anybody does have any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A. I'll give us a couple of minutes whilst we do that. Whilst we are waiting as well, I'm just going to reiterate that this will be uploaded onto our YouTube. So please do follow us on social channels, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and whatever else Elon Musk has decided to launch, LinkedIn. So yes, please do engage with us there, as well as the SALT.agency /call Dan. Just having a little look at the Q&A, there was just a question around like the estimating, Dan, impact on like numbers. So I guess this kind of sits around a bit of a topic that we were talking about, right? So there's a lot of research being shared right now, ranging from the impact being 5% to, I think you topped out at like 60 odd percent for SGE. So whether it's like forecasting the impact of like collapsed SGE or like generate SGE, but like how would we go about numerically communicating its impact to the wider team or to SLT or the wider business?
I think just because of how varied it is across different websites, and as I kind of said, and I can see the numbers that Rudy's put into the chat. Thank you so much, Rudy, there. But it will vary greatly between different websites. The 60% I was seeing was across websites that relied heavily on traffic that could necessarily be informational or commercial in that sense. Obviously, informational led and those kind of queries will potentially have greater scope for impact. I think there'll also be the big change with the adoption curve, because, like I said, voice search took 7 years to get to like a one in four in the US, which is a huge market. Given how when ChatGPT really became public just over a year ago now, and the start of the year, and how there was the big fear of it, and all Ipsos were doing, and like YouGov were doing all the polls, I think there'll be a learning curve as well with it. The best way to probably communicate it with non-technical stakeholders is to at least make them aware of it, but just use statistics and just be open and say, this is the potential exposure we've got, but there's variance on this. We can't 100% say you're going to see 7%, 8%, 9%, but if you're prepared for it, then you never want the storm to hit, but if you're prepared for it, at least when it does hit, you've got an answer and you're not just caught getting wet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we had a conversation about this as well when we're looking at, what are our predictions for 2024 within the world of SEO tech or even in marketing. And we were kind of saying that respect needs to be put back into the idea of experimentation and being open to experimentation. There are a lot of things happening and converging at the same time at the moment. And I think it comes to a point where historically, we've always wanted to forecast everything to the nth degree and want to know everything that's going to happen. But a larger portion of forecasting is looking at the past. And unfortunately, we haven't got really that much to look at the moment with things that are coming up in the future. So yeah, experimentation is extremely, extremely key going forward, I think, across all industries and sectors. We've just got another question for that Rudy has put forward as well. Any idea about the increased personalization that will happen for the results in search?
From an SGE perspective, my initial thoughts are that we won't see too much personalization coming from the AI generated snapshot. And the reason I've got behind that is just because the amount of resource that is required to run AI. We saw it 2-3 months ago already. I mean, I probably did some damage creating 8 images of fish reading newspapers, but it takes a lot of computing power. And if Google's running it at that kind of scale, I imagine they'll run it more at query level first before moving into personalization. Now, overall personalization in the classical kind of tableau link sense, I think we potentially will see that start to increase more, just because it really will form on how Google wants to use things like hidden gems and perspectives and better map that as well, especially with a big focus now coming around things like zero-party content, leveraging user-generated content, more different elements like that. So that gives Google a much bigger playing field to play with. And if they start reducing crawling on lesser quality websites, reducing indexing, that gives them both for saving but also more bandwidth to invest in that personalization, because if they're wanting people to stay on that server and within that Google ecosystem, especially with conversational prompts, there will need to be about learning over time. Like, you'll need to learn if someone's a Coke or a Pepsi person. You'll need to learn potentially what their political leanings are, so that as you're trying to recommend more things, you're getting it right. Because they're things that can turn somebody off from that experience and make them go back to the classic journey or lose that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, as with everything within technology, there is a user adoption piece that kind of plays into this at every level. So even some of the conversations we're having right now in the chat around kind of user behavior and how that's therefore user adoption is going to have ultimately be the drivers to the degree and nth degree of said impact. So yeah, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah, and just going in, just on Rudy's last point he kind of put into the chat, the adoption curve will be quite, for me, I think it'll be quite large. Obviously, with Google have made a number of comments about younger searchers, and I mean, I'm going to put myself outside of that bracket, even though I'm still somehow millennial.
Don't put yourself down. Come on now.
But I think there will be that adoption curve, and it's just about that preparedness. And I don't necessarily, from what I can see, think that preparing for SGE is too far detached from what our current modus operandi is, if you like, in terms of actual optimization. And I kind of feel those brands, those companies who do have that kind of first mover initiative, when that floodgate does open, users suddenly click, or Google changes something in the UX that makes it forced open, or they do testing or something like that to force the adoption. I think those brands who prepared early will be in a much better position, obviously. But yeah, that adoption curve and how quickly that's going to be is going to be key. And I know I keep referring to voice search being 7 years, but 2011 to 2018 were very different years to what they are, like what 2024 is going to be. Smartphone technology is much better. Wi-Fi technology is much better. It's people in that younger generation are also more exposed to tech. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that adoption curve will actually play out.
Yeah. And even when you were talking about earlier as well around the impact of like how much energy Google is going to put into this, really. AI, if you kind of put your finger on it, has been around for quite a long time, but it's only really come into the realm of conversation rather recently. But even with that being said, the speed at which we've moved in the last 6 months is like something that we've never seen before. So, over time, Google is experimenting in the same way that we are too, and so therefore it will pick up. Tech will get faster. AI and processing powers will get quicker. The need is there, the demand is there, and so therefore, the production will inevitably occur. But at the moment, it's, as we say, like, it's very much experimental phase, which is quite an exciting period, to be fair.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's I'd much rather have this amount of insight on it though versus other things I've done over the years. But again, picking on what Rudy's last point he's just put in there as well. I think what we're seeing Google doing already with things like personalization, how they're moving, how they're trying to combat TikTok, Amazon, multimodal search, it makes sense. Oh, that's a really good fact. I'm actually going to read that out, but really just remember AI energy usage is estimated to be on the same level as Belgium by the end of the year. That's going to be another key driver in this, because if Google see a lot of, which is why I talk about the personalization side within AI, it's expensive to run, and there's going to be more pressure being put on tech who utilize AI in tools to do so more responsibly, and that's going to be driven by the climate change agenda and other elements. So I think that for the moment, personalization will continue to be run in the same way it's been using clicks and data and rank brains, the same point that it is currently now. But the AI probably will lag behind that, unless it's very token based at a user account level for logged in. Because again, I mean, for example, with sports, I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. I don't want to be faced with Minnesota Vikings logos the minute I log in or try to ask questions about football. So there'll be a little bit of learning curve like that, but I don't think too much personalization in my AI side.
Okay. Lovely stuff. Yeah, and if it's using as much energy as Belgium, nobody tell British Gas because my bills are already kicking off. So we're just going to wrap it up at the moment. I appreciate that the conversation then was kind of steering into also talking about, stealing market share, what Google's thinking around TikTok and the search engines and that kind of social commerce space, which is probably another webinar for another time. So with that being said, please do keep in touch with us. So whether that be Twitter, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, please do follow us. This will be uploaded to YouTube. But apart from that, please join me in giving a round of applause to Dan for putting this amount of energy, not as much as to power Belgium, but enough to keep us engaged this evening. And thank you very, 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 very much for attending. And we shall see you very soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good Christmas.